Welcome to Sporty's series on learning to fly. I'm Spencer Suderman. You may have seen me previously in Sporty's Advanced Pilot Skills and IFR Insights series. I've spent the past 21 years flying air shows and making pilots safer by teaching upset recovery and spins. In this episode, we're going to see how to handle common failure scenarios such as engine stoppage or loss of power and various electrical and avionics outages. Then we'll return to the airport and fly around the pattern and land in a gusty crosswind. Now, let's go up in a Cessna 172 at 3,000 feet over Jacksonville Beach in Florida, where things are about to go wrong.
Let's look at two common emergency scenarios. One is an engine issue. The other is a communications or electrical issue. Engine issues come in two flavors. Engine completely stopped, in which case you can try to restart it, or the engine simply losing power. It doesn't make as much RPM, not as much power. You might have to do some troubleshooting. There are three things that need to happen in an engine emergency. One is establish best glide. So that's the aviate part. Next is look for a place to land. That's the navigate part. Third is communicate. Call it flight following, air traffic control, whoever you're talking to, let them know you have an issue and what your intentions are, and ask for help. So let's simulate a loss of engine power, flying along. Lost my power. First thing I need to do is establish best glide. This airplane, it's between 65 and 68 knots. 68 knots if it's at full growth. Let's get the airplane trimmed for that airspeed. Take some workload off the pilot. So I've got it trimmed. Looks like it's going to settle in there 65 to 68 knots, which is perfect. Let's look for a place to land. That's the navigate part. I see a highway, lots of cars. I may be able to land on it. It does have a nice straightaway, but a car might hit me after I land. I may not realize what I'm doing. There's a beach right below me. There's hard-packed sand. That might actually be a good choice as well. And the beach doesn't look too crowded today, so I'm going to start turning towards that beach. I'm flying the airplane, always fly the airplane. I've got my landing spot pick out. Now, I've already got Jacksonville approach dialed in on the radio. I can flip-flop to them and call them, let them know I've got an emergency. I better pull out the checklist and start troubleshooting. So I pull out my checklist and start running down all the things the checklist says to do. Is the mixture in? What about the throttle position? What about the ignition switch? Things working. Looks like I'm committed to the landing. So now we're going to have an emergency landing. You're going to work through scenarios with engine outs quite a bit as you train. That's enough. Let's power back up. Don't forget when you power up, notice the nose coming up. You got to control that because we adjusted the trim for a very low airspeed. So I'm going to move that trim wheel and get the nose under control so I don't have a lot of pressure on the yoke. Really, that's what we're doing with trim. We're taking the pressure off the yoke. So full power, we'll climb back up. How do we deal with electrical failures in the airplane? All these instruments run off of electricity. There's a battery. There's a backup battery for these digital instruments. There's an alternator recharging the battery. If the alternator fails, well, the battery in the airplane, the main battery, power the airplane. If the alternator fails and the main battery dies because you've been running on it, you've still got a standby battery to run your instruments and your radio tied in with your whole Garmin G1000 flight deck system. But you could have specific failures. So for instance, we could have a failure where the primary flight display
right ahead of you,
just like that. All of a sudden, primary flight display is gone. Automatically, it's switched over to the other display. So now I've got all my instruments back, but look, one of my radios is gone. There's a big X on it, meaning radio 1 is also gone. I do have radio 2, so I'm just going to have to use it. I'm flying along, and what if my digital attitude indicator is working? This is what the screen will look like. All of a sudden, you get all these X's telling you things have failed. I have no more flight instruments. First thing I'm going to do in a G1000 equipped airplane is push the big button, and everything moves over to the other display. Of course, I've failed both of my attitude indicators, so that didn't make a difference. They're still showing the same failure. Of course, this airplane also has a backup set of instruments, an altimeter, an attitude indicator, and an airspeed indicator to use in an emergency. Luckily, I have an app on this iPad, and I have a Sentry Plus device that has an attitude heading reference system built in talking to this. So I actually have a heading and attitude reference on this. Now, in an emergency, you could depend on this, but if this happens, say, in instrument flight, that's a real emergency you're going to have to deal with. And this might work out for us. Let's do a few maneuvers. Seems to keep up with the airplane pretty good. In a real emergency, this might be an option. Modern airplanes that have digital flight decks, as part of their certification, are required to have backup batteries. The chances of a complete and utter electrical failure are very low between the alternator on the engine powering the airplane, the main chip battery storing electrical power, and the backup battery. It's very unlikely that you would have that many failures in flight. Nothing's impossible, but it could happen. So what if you did have that complete electrical failure and now you've got no radios? Well, it's a good idea to carry a backup handheld radio that you can easily. Let's pretend my radio has just failed. I'm going to reach back into my bag. I'm going to pull out my handheld radio. This particular one is a Sporty PJ2 Plus. This radio is designed specifically for emergency purposes. On the top here, we would open up this little rubber flap, and I can unplug my headset, plug it right into the top. I don't need an extra little pigtail adapter. And when I turn it on, all I have to do is dial in a frequency. It's on, I could just go 1, 3, 2, 1, which is the tower for Craig, and push the button and start transmitting. So this is really handy to have in a radio like this that's ultra simple to use. Doesn't require any extra accessories, runs on regular AA batteries, which if this thing's left off in your bag, probably hold a charge for months to years, is a great accessory to keep with you in an emergency. So let me put that away, and we'll head back to the airport.
Those were just some of the common failure scenarios that you'll practice during training until it becomes second nature to respond calmly and deal with the situation. Now let's get back into the plane, where I've already picked up ATIS Alpha for Craig Airport, and I'm about to call the tower.
Craig Tower, since 814 Mike Victor, 8 miles to the southeast with Alpha. Like to work the pattern.
Number 814 Mike Victor, Craig Tower. You said what's your position?
About 8 miles to the southeast, over the beach.
I think I see you there. What I want you to do is head west for about 3 miles and then join the right downwind for runway 14, report midfield.
Head west for 3 miles, then join the right downwind for 814 Mike Victor.
Here we see Craig Airport and the right pattern for runway 14. After talking to the tower prior to entering the airspace, normally you would enter the pattern by joining the downwind on a 45-degree angle, then call tower and advise when downwind abeam the middle of the runway. At this point in a Cessna 172, you should be reducing power initially to 1500 RPM, pitch up the nose to slow down to 85 knots, and trim while maintaining 1,000 feet, then deploy 10 degrees of flaps about the point where you are abeam the approach end runway numbers. As you turn base, reduce speed to 75 knots and trim as needed and deploy 20 degrees of flaps. At this point, you should be losing altitude with the goal of turning base to final at 500 feet. As you turn on to final, reduce speed to 65 knots, deploy 30 degrees of flaps, and trim is needed to maintain this pitch and speed. At this point, adjust pitch with the yoke to maintain airspeed and use the throttle to control altitude and descent rate. If on the glide slope, the PAPI on the left side of the runway will indicate with 2 red and 2 white lights. Once established on the correct glide path, you can also just look down the nose of the plane, and if the runway stays in the same relative position, keep going. The runway is moving up, you are too low, and if moving down, you are too high. Craig Airport has a control tower, and on this day it was quite busy with traffic and gusty winds. This made for anything but a standard traffic pattern. A pilot has to be ready for anything, as you are about to see.
Forward, clear to land. Hey, Quebec up. We're going to the sky.
Okay, I've got a good visual here on the runway so I can stay parallel and maintain my distance.
And remember 4 Mike Victor. At midfield, give me a left 360.
Left 360 at midfield, 4 Mike Victor.
Clear track 201, the short approach approved. Your number 2 to follow the jet, short final, runway 14, clear to land.
Clear to land, runway 14, short approach for 10-1, thank you.
Number 4 Mike Victor, give me another left 360.
Another left 360 for Mike Victor.
Number 79 Sierra Foxtrot, no delay, runway 14, clear for takeoff, extend upwind.
No delay, clear for takeoff, runway 14, extending upwind, 79 Sierra Fox.
Number 238, there's 1 Archer depart before you arrive.
Roger, 238.
Number 4 Mike Victor, your number 2. You see the Cessna on the left base?
Looking for traffic, 4 Mike Victor.
Number 44 Romeo, you can rejoin the downwind.
Rejoin downwind, 44 Romeo.
Negative contact on traffic, 4 Mike Victor.
4 Mike Victor, looking for about a 1 mile left base there, 700.
Looking 4 Mike Victor.
I'm now reestablished on downwind and have reduced the throttle to 1500 RPM, put in 10 degrees of flaps, and maintaining 85 knots.
Negative contact for 4 Mike Victor.
Number 4 Mike Victor, start your right base turn. They're right off your right side there. You number 2 to fall them, runway 14. Clear, touch and go, make left traffic, report midfield.
Start my right turn, runway 14, clear touch and go, 4 Mike Victor.
Coast Guard 8214, stay wide if you're going to be fast. There's an archer ahead of you about 2 miles.
We're looking for that archer and we're slowing down as much as we can. 8214.
Clear track 130, number 3. You see that Cessna engine right on the base?
As I roll out on base, I set the flaps to 20 degrees and slow down to 75 knots, setting trim as needed to descend from pattern altitude.
Wind check.
Wind is 120 at 14, gust 21.
If wind is 120, that means it is to the...
Number 44 Romeo, you number 4. Look for three aircraft on final.
44 Romeo's looking, number 4. I'm on final. Got full flaps in, I'm getting my speed down to 65. Now I'm going to have to crab a bit, compensate for that wind. That's going to blow me this way.
8214 has that archer.
Or I'm not going to land in a crab. As I get closer to the runway, I'm going to convert it to a slip. Bank in one direction, yaw in the other.
3, running off of 3 and contact ground 18. If you okay, keep your speed up on the runway to running off of 5, contact ground 18.
Right tower, clear track 130, 2 miles out. Runway.
Number 238, did you copy?
No, I did not. It's right
Traffic.
on 5.
Okay, right.
Okay, now I'm going to start going from a crab to a slip. So left wing down, right rudder
Clear track
in.
130, you're still clear to land.
Thank you, clear track 130, clear land.
Number 44 Romeo, you
Just
number
not
2
available.
now. You see that archer heading to your right, 500?
Maintain control, stay on center line.
The archer heading to your right, runway 14, clear to land.
Number 2, cleared to land. Bringing the nose up, bringing the nose up,
Number 9, Sheriff.
bringing the nose up, bringing the nose up, landing on the mains. And let the nose come down all by itself. Okay, flaps are up, power's in.
Break tower, Mooney 495, Charlie Bravo, number 1.
And we're off again.
14.
Number 495 Charlie Bravo, Craig Tower, you coming up for pattern work?
That's primitive. We're going to do 1 trip around, close back.
And as soon as I'm off, notice I'm putting in the crab for the wind.
Learning to land safely in any wind condition is a foundational skill that must be mastered by all pilots. Using proper techniques, such as crabbing at altitude, then slipping all the way to touchdown, will build safe, repeatable skills and confidence. You'll spend many training flights going round and round the pattern, practicing landings until you have developed solid skills. Thanks for riding along, and I hope this flight gave you a feel for what learning to fly is all about. To take the next step, check out Sporty's Learn to Fly course, which includes over 15 hours of HD video training and comprehensive written test preparation tools. Head over to sportys.com/courses to check out a free demo and get started.